£2, and then just slip her gently back in the water to swim away. Whoa, look at that chap. There he goes, he's off to Timbuktu. What a beauty. Slip her back. Hi, welcome. My name's Simon Gawesworth, and I'm here at Chew Valley Reservoir in the southwest of England, probably my favourite of all reservoirs. It's 1,200 acres, no more than 37 feet deep at the very deepest, and this means that you can always get down to the fish, and there's always great hatches of fly. So it's a good water for fishing fly. We're going to look at a few techniques here, fishing on top, subsurface, down to the bottom, fishing dry flies, nymphs, buzzers and lures, and the idea is just to show you a few techniques to give you an idea and an understanding of stillwater fishing from a boat on reservoirs such as this one. Hopefully, to bonus, we'll have a couple of trout as well, just to show you what the trout look like when they come out of a reservoir such as Chew. The fishing we're going to do today is from a boat, all drifting. There's other ways of fishing, of course, on a reservoir such as this. You could fish from the bank, and that involves some different techniques. Some of the techniques we're going to do today are very, very similar, but some of the techniques are going to be slightly different. And of course, you can always go out in a boat and anchor up, find the spot, and just stay where you are and fish various techniques to catch the fish. But today, we're going to look at fishing in a boat, drifting across downwind. Well, here we are, at last, got to the spot. We're going to start the fishing. Moreton Bank. I've set up myself with a slime line, slow intermediate line, a slow sinking Polyleader, team of nymphs and buzzers. Probably my favourite way of fishing a reservoir like this. I don't hold much hope at the moment for this technique because there's not a lot of fly life about and there's not a lot of swallows about. Usually I look around for swallows, which indicate that the flies are hatching off. I look on the surface of the water to see how many naturals are on the water, what sizes and what colours there are, and I don't see much. So we're going to start with this because I like this technique, and it's great fun and it's a very useful technique to fish. But throughout this video we'll be showing you all the other techniques of fishing, whether they're going to be apt for today or not. I'm going to set up a drift. The fishing I don't think is going to be too easy. It's a bit bright today, and when it's a bit bright you want to try and find yourself some fish. And there's two ways of fishing from a boat. You can anchor your boat where you are, or you can set up a drift and just drift trying to find some fish. If you know where the fish are, anchoring's great. At the moment, I don't know where the fish are. I've had a little bit of advice from Bob and Mike in the hut there, and they've suggested a couple of places, and this is why I'm over here. I'm going to start off with a drift. And one of the most important things when you're drifting, especially if there's any wind about, is a drogue, a sea anchor. It slows your drift down, and you throw it over the side, and you pay out some rope, and the thing will sink. This is a Witchwood Para drogue, and it's by far the best drogue on the market at the moment. It's large, and it slows the drift to a very, very slow drift. Even in the windiest conditions, you get a really slow drift. And once we've drifted on a bit, we'll take out the slack in the rope. This thing will sink and slow the drift down by at least a third or a quarter of the speed that the wind would push us otherwise. You also see one great thing about it, it's got two ropes. And when I come to pull it in, you'll see the advantage of this twin rope system. It makes pulling it in so easy and so fast compared to regular drogues. We've started close to the bank, as you can see there in the background. It's shallow water. We're going to drift out over shallow water, gradually to deeper water, and so I'm going to cover the depths to start off with. Hopefully, we're going to find the depths where the fish are feeding at. There's a little ledge out there which drops off to deeper water. They might be off that ledge. I don't see much rising. I've set my other rod up with a team of dries, and later on we'll show you how to fish dry flies. But as I say, let's start off with the slime line and this Polyleader, and just start with nymphs and buzzers. Strip off enough line to cover. You don't want to cast long lengths, not when you're drifting, because there's no point in casting and risking tangles and casting massive lengths of line, because if you want to reach that piece of water an extra 10 or 20 feet, well, wait 5 minutes or 2 minutes and you'll drift that extra distance. I've got a fairly long leader on, and 3 flies, team of 3 flies, mixes of nymphs and buzzers, I mentioned. I like to use fluorocarbons, and fluorocarbon is a kind of a new material. It's less visible to the fish. It sinks, it's slightly heavier than normal monofills, and you'll find that most of the top anglers these days are using fluorocarbons. This one in particular is a very tough one. It's a Rio fluorocarbon, and it's an excellent fluorocarbon for fishing in conditions like this, where I think it'll be a bit hard. Now, the most important thing really at this stage is to get everything wet. The line should sink. It's a slow intermediate. It should sink. But most lines, when they're dry and you start off fishing, float on the surface of the water. This is no exception. And so when you want to get your line down to the right depth straight away, you give it a couple of little tugs there just to break the surface film. That gets the fly line breaking the surface film, and now it starts to sink. Now remember, you're drifting on towards your flies. So the speed you want your flies to move, you've got to actually retrieve a little quicker than you want them to move, because let's say I'm drifting at 5 knots, just as a figure, I'm not going that quick. If you retrieved at 3 knots, you're creating slack. So you have to drift at least 5 knots, you have to retrieve, say, 6 knots to get any movement in the fly. So do take into account how fast you drift with the speed that you actually retrieve the fly. Now this technique of fishing nymphs and buzzers when the fish are feeding is wonderful. I mean, just wait and see what happens when we get some takes on this. I want the flies to go down couple of feet. They're not near the surface, there's nothing rising, there's not a lot of fly life, so I'm figure eighting just about the same speed as the boat is moving for the first 6 or 7 seconds. Then when I'm convinced that the flies, or when I think the flies are at the depth I want, I'll just start speeding up slightly to maneuver the flies at the speed and kind of movement that I want to. Try and keep your rod tip over the line. You can see that the boat always swings around a bit, and my line is swung to the right there. I've got a little angle to it, so I would swing the rod towards those flies for a little bit more sensitivity and keeping my rod dead in line with those fly line and fly. Take should be felt. You can't see much with this because your line's underwater. You might see the curve hanging from the rod tip just tighten, but most of the times you'll feel it. Now at the end of each retrieve, you want to lift your rod up and just hang the line and flies dead still, dead vertical, and watch your Polyleader, or watch the tip of your fly line if you haven't got a Polyleader, because very frequently you will get your line just tightening as you're holding that line vertical. It's called fishing the hang, and your line is hanging vertically. The flies are just drifting under the boat, just in the current at the different depths, because you've got 3 flies on. And what will happen is you'll just see your line maybe just tighten, or you might, if you're lucky, just feel the slightest twitch. It is a deadly technique, and you should never just pick your line out of the water at the end of the retrieve and cast. I've seen that too often, myself included, a lot of other anglers I've been with, and you see this boil underneath the boat as the fish were looking at the fly. The hang is deadly. During your retrieve, you want to keep alternating how the fly moves. I'm retrieving slow because I think that's the speed the fish want the fly, but every now and then I'll just accelerate the retrieve like this, get a little fast figure of 8 retrieve and then go back to slow. You will be amazed how many times you get takes just on that acceleration of that figure of 8. And it doesn't matter if you're fishing nymphs or buzzers, if you're fishing mini lures or large lures, whatever style of way you're fishing, don't just get stuck on a retrieve with one speed of retrieve. It doesn't have to be fast figure of 8. You can be figure of 8ing and then just to get extra speed, instead of fast figure of 8ing, if you want it a little quicker, you can just do a couple of short, sharp pulls, get some speed into the fly. It doesn't matter, nymphs and buzzers. A lot of people will say that's too quick. It doesn't matter. Sometimes the fish want stuff like that. So you've got to, until you find the answer, keep changing your speeds, your depths, and your positions of fishing. Well, the nymphs and buzzers I love, and they catch a great deal of fish, particularly at this time of year. It's mild, the fish should be feeding, but as I said, there's no naturals about, very, very few swallows about, nothing happening on this, and therefore it's time to change. And nymphs and buzzers are fine. They're imitations, they're food imitatives, so that if the fish were feeding, I would persevere with them, or if I was convinced they were feeding, I'd persevere with them. But when fish are not feeding so readily, you have to do something else. And this something else is going to be changing to a team of small lures, non-artificials, that annoy the fish rather than imitate a food, and see if that produces any more success. So I'll cut off this team. And again, with the lures, you want to fish a variety of colours and a variety of sizes, a variety of types. I like to fish mostly colour changes, so what I tend to do is fish black and a peach. Peach is a great colour. I'm putting on the point a little red-headed viva, fly called a red-headed viva with jungle cock cheeks. It's a great pulling fly. Pulling is just another term for moving your fly slightly quicker than the naturals, trying to, if you like, get the fish to slam at it rather than take it. So on the point goes my mini viva. In the middle dropper, I'll fish kind of a large nymph, but almost a lure type nymph, and that's going to be a damsel, large damsel. It can be taken either as a real fly, or it can be taken as a lure. You can fish it a little bit quicker. It's got a very soft tail, so it pulsates and moves nicely in the water. And then on the top dropper, one of my all-round favourite pulling flies, the peach doll. Just a peach colour baby doll. All mini lures. Most of the time I fish small lures. I tend not to fish the larger lures because I do a lot of competition fishing, and in competitions you're limited to a maximum of a size 10 hook. And that means that whenever I'm going fishing, I stick to those rules, just so that I'm always practicing, always working with what I'm allowed to in a competition. You can certainly put on bigger lures and possibly have more success, but when you do a lot of competition fishing, it's worth sticking to competitions. We're going to have the same thoughts with this team of lures as with nymphs and buzzers. Figure of 8 slowly. Yeah, there we go. Whoa! Took on the hang, took on the drop, sorry. Just a slight tightening of the line when that fly landed. Well, I didn't expect things to happen quite so fast. I expected things to happen, but not so fast as that. Whoa, down he goes. Now, let's see what fly he's on. That was a bit of a fast start. Oh, nice fish. Look at the way he jumped there. Team of flies. You just set the thing up and it just tangled up that entire team of flies. So I'm going to spend at least 5 minutes untangling it. And he's on the peach doll. What a favourite. There you go. Look at him tugging. Now, there's always a debate whether you fish the flies, play the fish on the reel or by hand. I like to play them on the reel, but this one hasn't yet given me enough, here he goes, maybe this time, taken off enough line to get me onto the reel. I got too much slack. And the downfall with this slack is I could easily put my foot on it, or step on it, get a tangle. Here he comes. There we go. One rainbow trout, the first of the day. Well, that was the peach doll. What a quick start that was. Now maybe this will bode well for the rest. Let me give it a quick clonk on the head. And one for dinner tonight. There we go. Let's show you where he's hooked. Peach doll right in the, just below the scissors. The take was great. The fly landed and I was just figure-eighting. I was trying to talk to you and do everything at the same time. I was figure-eighting just to keep in touch with the fly, and he walloped it.
Stay there. Carry on.
Now, when fishing's difficult like this, there's one thing that you want to do. Having caught your first fish, you spoon it out, see what's inside him. And I can see down his throat there is actually quite a lot of food. And inside the spoon, my God, it's heaving, absolute heaving with chironomids, tiny buzzers. They're all alive, they're twitching and alive. Let's show you that. And this shows that, contrary to what I was saying, they're feeding. Is what they're feeding on. Hundreds and hundreds, see them all squirming away, tiny olive buzzers. There's a few water louse in here, but it's feeding. And you can see the colour from that is mostly green and most of the olive. Now that's a great sign of what colour to fish. If I want to go back to fishing natural flies in imitative patterns, then exactly what I'll fish. I'll fish small olive and green bugs and fish them just about 2 or 3 feet down from the surface, which is roughly where that fish took. But well worth changing the fly just to catch that first fish. So you have that quandary now. Now I've found a fly that works. Do you stick with that fly, or do you immediately put on a green buzzer and go back to fishing imitative patterns? That's one of the things, one of the beauties of the stillwater fishing game. You never know the answer. Well, that was great fun. What a good start to fishing this pulling team. I'll stick with it for a bit, of course. Once you've got something that works, you don't change it. What I'd like to show you whilst I'm fishing this small team of pullers is the various retrieves and the various techniques that you'd use to retrieve. Got a bit hurried that time. The fish took far too quickly, far too early for me to tell you anything. But the same thing as we were doing with the buzzers and nymphs. You figure of 8 steadily at the same pace as the boat's drifting till the depth you've got. Then you retrieve it at the speed you want to. Again, alter your speed in the middle of your pulling in, do a couple of fast little quick accelerations, perhaps then go back to your steady figure of 8. Always, even if you're fishing mini lures, if you're fishing deep down with dye lines, always fish the hang. And then roll it up to the surface and carry on again. Apart from the figure of 8 retrieve, of course, you can fish a lot quicker. Sometimes you'll think the fish are going to want a faster moving fly. And to that extent, again, figure of 8 retrieve to keep in touch with the fly as it sinks, but then just start to go into some smooth, steady pulling. Just keeping in touch with the fly, a little quicker than the drift again. Rod fairly low, although you don't need to be so sensitive about the takes with these, because pulling in at this speed, you will takes, they'll be solid. Alter how you retrieve your line all the time that you're fishing it until you find out one technique and one speed and one depth that works. Then you stay with it. When you've got one drift that works, you stay with it. When you've got the drifts, this one's produced one fish. We've come out, quarter of a mile from the bank. We've produced one fish. It's not pumping with fish, so I might consider a drift slightly to one side next time to try and find the shoal of fish that we're looking for. Another good technique, banned on a lot of places, but an excellent way of retrieving sometimes is the roly-poly, where you tuck the rod under your arm and double shuffle it in like this. Keeping a fast retrieve, it gives you the fastest form of retrieve you can get, and sometimes the speed is exactly what the fish want. But do check, a lot of places ban the roly-poly. Other than that, The only other thing which has really worked for me very, very well in certain fishing conditions is the stop, the complete stop in the middle of the retrieve. It doesn't matter what retrieve you're doing. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's something like fishing the hang, but many times you're figure of eighting your line in like this, and halfway through or a third of the way through, just stop. Just stop. And then a couple of pulls to keep in touch with the line and get back in tension again and start retrieving. And again, I have so many takes on that stop. It's uncanny how many takes you get when you just stop it. And that first little movement of fly can produce the goods. Keep your eyes open for lines of bubbles and slicks like this, wind lanes and slicks. The fish move up these lines of bubbles looking for the food. Always cast your line, whenever you can, whatever line you're fishing, down these lines of bubbles. It doesn't matter what line or flies you've got on. If you're fishing the fast line or to the top with dry flies, if ever I see a line of bubbles, I will concentrate on that line of bubbles until it's out of my casting range, or to the side of the boat where you're going to interfere with your casting partner's line. Created by wind currents blowing the bubbles together, and of course where the bubbles are blown together you're also going to get food blown together, and this is why the fish continuously look for this line of bubbles. Okay, so we're here to a particular place. If you're a regular and a local, you fish it well, you start to know what winds mean what drifts and what areas are fishing well. But let's say you've never arrived at a lake, you have no idea where to start. How do you find out? The first thing, obviously, have a word with the ranger. He knows the water, talk to him, he'll tell you everything. He'll tell you as much information as you need to find the fish. Also, keep your eyes open. Look for these slicks and these scum lanes, these bubble lines. They're all indications that food will be around there. For other boats, it's a sure fact that if you find an area on a reservoir where there's a lot of boats concentrated together, either there's one great party going on out there, or more likely there's a lot of fish and those boats are in the area of the fish. The boats today are spread out all over the place, so it indicates that there's no real hot spot. Everyone's searching for the fish. Keep your eyes peeled for swallows. They come diving down, they feed on the insects, the buzzers, as they hatch out of the surface. Where the buzzer's flying, there's naturals about, there'll be fish about. Think about the temperatures. Bright, hot, sunny days or really cold days, fish go deep. So look at the structure and the topography of the land to try and deduce where the deeper water is. If you think the fish are in shallow water, go into the edges and fish the margins and set your drift parallel to the shore, kind of 30 to 40 yards out. Other than that, it's just get your binoculars and keep your eyes peeled and just keep looking for signs of moving fish, swirls, slicks, wind lanes and swallows. Let's take a look at other sinking line techniques. This is the, as I said, the slime line, the slow sinking intermediate. You get various speeds of intermediate line, which is generally a slow sinking line, but various speeds of slow sinking, if you can believe it. And you get sinking lines that go right down to about 8 inches a second, which is an incredibly fast sinking line. Today the conditions are right. The fish shouldn't be deep, and there would be no actual fishing purpose to go down to fish the sinking line unless you wanted to just try and find yourself a big slab of a trout that's not following the herd, if you like, and coming up to the surface and feeding. But I'll set up with a couple of sinking lines and just show you some sinking line techniques that we can use as well. One last little tip, always cast your line out on the last cast and wind it in. It just gives that, once again, it gives that a different form of retrieve. Might be the one that the fish are looking for. I never just wind in once I've finished. Do that last cast, wind it in, and then change your line over. Here's one great tip when you want to change over lines. You learn this from competition fishing. You learn a lot with competition fishing, and this is one of the things you learn. It's a quick way of changing lines without having to cut off your fly, everything in and re-thread it all up. Wind your fly till your top fly is stuck in the tip ring. Take off the reel you don't want. Screw on the reel that you do want. In this case, I'm going on to a very, very fast sinking line just to show you the kind of sinking line techniques for fishing deep down. This is a Rio Deep 7, real deep fisher. and thread your line up the rod rings up to where it meets the leader. And you've guessed it, all you do is then cut the leader off of the old line and retie it to your new line. And what you've got is your rod threaded up straight away. Admittedly, you're with the same team of flies that you had. Now, of course, you can rechange, get that in place, your flies now if you wanted to. If I wanted to fish a different fly, I would. But what you've saved is the time that it took to rethread the rod and doing all that business. Job done. Line changed. I'll stick with the same flies. Why not? Produced a fish. Test your knot. And line is threaded up. Reel is on the rod. One, and you're out fishing again. Right, so we've got the deep, fast sinking line on, gone right down. Again, you wouldn't use it in these conditions, but I'm showing you. The techniques are similar. Figure of 8 retrieve until you've got the depth that you want. Then work the fly at the speed you want, a couple of extra changes. But with a sinking line, what you'll find is a sinking line of this speed will at one stage hang vertically underneath the rod. And one of the most successful techniques, it's kind of part of the hang, but you have one extra bit before that, and that is the accelerant, the lift of the rod, where you lift the rod rapidly up. And what happens is the path your flies take goes along the water kind of deep like this, and then it gets to the stage where you've got about 6 or 7 feet of fly line left, and you accelerate and lift your rod, and you get this change of direction in the fly's path, and you will again get an awful lot of takes with that acceleration, that little lift. So in terms of fishing technique, I'd figure of eight, let's say I want the fly 10 or 12 feet down, start to work in the line like this fairly quickly, get to a spot where I've got 5 or 6 feet of line out, whatever you want to lift, accelerate the rod tip up, and then just hang a foot of leader outside the water. Again for about 8 or 10 seconds, just hang it, hold it, wait for it. Whilst you're letting a sinking line sink, any sinking line, it doesn't matter whether it's this fast sinking line or whether it's the intermediate line, count the depth. What that means is when you get your line out there and you're figure of eighting retrieving to get the depth you want to, just count how many seconds you let the line sink, because it gives, you don't know exactly in terms of feet and inches how deep it is. So I'm figure of eighting roughly the speed I drift here. Let's say that was 12 seconds. Start the retrieve on the 12 seconds. And then you alter it. Maybe next time go to 14, maybe 16, maybe 20 seconds, and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper until you find the depth that the fish are at. And when you found that depth, you'll know, because obviously you get the take, and you stick to that depth. You stick to 18 seconds or wherever it was that you had the take at. Now again, in these conditions, you don't really expect too much action deep, deep down. So if I was fishing this line today for some unknown, obscure reason, maybe I'd have a bet on it, that I'd get something, I would be retrieving and fishing it straight away now. I'd be fishing it no more than 1 second sink so that my fly is going to be not as deep as it would be. But even so, with these fast sinking lines, the dye lines and these deep lines, with a 1 second pause like that and stripping in like this, the flies are going to be 6 or 7, very, very deep. Again, finding fish is the key. And so if you find that other boats are catching fish and you're not catching fish, one clue as to how deep they're fishing, if you think they're fishing deep, look at the tip of the rod that they're fishing. And you'll see two things. You'll first of all see the line hanging vertically under the rod rings. There's a pretty good guideline that that is deep. But secondly, you'll see the rod bounce every time they pull it. You see bouncing down like this. And that tells you, you can see the angle of the line coming out of the water, that this line and fly is very, very deep. Another technique with sinking lines, which we're going to look at, not again fish catching today, but on its day it is absolutely deadly. The old booby. The booby is a fly, a lure if you like, of nefarious colours, bright colours and dull colours, usually with a soft marabou tail and big polystyrene bead eyes. And there's a lot of talk about boobies, and sometimes you fish 3, Sometimes you fish 2, sometimes you fish 1. I'm going to stick on 2 boobies. The water's fairly clear, and you don't want to fish boobies in really clear water. You want your boobies maybe 8 or 10 feet apart, a long distance between the 2 flies. If you're fishing murky water and you want to fish a better chance of the fish to see it, then you'd fish 3 flies, maybe a lot closer together. And sometimes in really clear water, when it's very difficult, you fish 1 single booby off your sinking line. So don't get stuck with the idea that you're fishing 3 flies. You normally fish 3 flies, but boobies tend to fish a lot less, sometimes. So the boobies that are going on are the top and the middle, sorry, the top and the point. And it's buoyant, which is, if you don't know anything about booby fishing, you might think, well, why is he fishing a buoyant fly on a fast sinking line? The answer is you get a completely different way of fishing the fly. The sinking line goes down deep, sure, and the buoyancy of the booby means that the flies hang vertically above the fly line this time, rather than with all the other techniques where they're level with the fly line or deeper than the fly line because you're using polyleaders or weighted flies. The booby means they're fishing above the fly line, and they pulse and kick and twitch very tantalizingly in the water. As I say, I'm just going to fish the 2 at the moment, so I'll take the middle fly off. And don't think that when you're fishing sinking lines, just because I've shown you so far fishing sinking lines with lures, and I'm going to show you a couple of ideas and tips with a booby, that you only use lures and big gaudy flies with a booby, with a sinking line. You'll frequently catch fish, buzzers and nymphs, right down deep on your dye lines and your deep lines. When you're fishing 25 to 30 feet down, do try fishing chironomids and buzzers and nymphs that shallow water. Right, the boobies. You need to fish them on a fast sinking line because they are buoyant. So if you have a slow sinking line, they kind of line curves under, and they don't go down too deep, although eventually they will. I've got 2 boobies on, a figure of 8 as ever, just letting the thing sink down to the depth you want it. However, the wind has dropped and the sun's gone behind the shade. It's perfect for dry flies. So I'll be on the dries in a moment to show you how to fish dries, and we expect some fish on that. Put my foot in it by telling you that. Boobies, figure of 8 retrieve. Keep in touch with the fly. A couple of acceleration. The all-important stop. The acceleration again. That stop, as I said before, but particularly with boobies, is incredibly productive. It just means that the boobies stop accelerating in towards you and then just suddenly start very free-flowing, drifting up towards the surface. Always fish the hang. And away you come. Nothing that time. Exactly the same principle, and you just keep working the booby at different depths on your drift. You'd use the booby in conditions where you think the fish are deep. Bright lights, bright hot sunshine, very cold perhaps, or generally the fish not feeding, not a lot of food about. Maybe the fish are feeding on daphnia, or tiny water fleas. You don't think they're feeding on nymphs and buzzers. They're certainly not. There's the odd fish rising on the surface now, so dries, as I say, I expect to do something on that. But with this booby, watch your line tip as you're hanging it, as you're fishing still. But again, you can't see a lot because, of course, everything is so deep down here. You're just relying on feel. And you'll get takes. You'll get the takes on both the strip like this, the still stop like that, the acceleration, the slow retrieves. Keep altering. And generally, if I'm convinced I've got the right depth, I would stick with one technique for 20th right depth and just stay with the boobies for exactly that length of time before perhaps changing to mini lures or buzzers or nymphs or something deep like that if I think I've got the depth right. But one thing I know without a shadow of a doubt is today I have not got the depth right with this big deep sinking line. So that gives you a little idea about booby fishing, just a couple of minutes to give you an idea. Let us move on to the dry fly. As before, wind in your line from out there. Right, the decision's made. We're on to the dries. There's a couple of those slicks I was telling you about to the side. But one thing I meant, drogue, the Witchwood Paradrogue with the 2 ropes, so easy. Just pull one rope and you can really speedily pull the drogue in. Most drogues take a long time because you're pulling in a great weight of water, but not with a Paradrogue. Look how quick that is. And in competition fishing, where you've got the speed is of the essence, there's nothing better. We're going to move the boat. Make sure you get all the drogue rope out of the way so it doesn't put around the engine. I'm going to move the boat to a couple of those slicks because there are fish moving through those slicks. And the next thing is to show you just how to fish the dry fly. It's exhilarating. We're in position. We've got 2 slicks right in front of the boat, one on the bow, one on the stern. Perfect for fishing the dry fly. I'm going to drift down these slicks, keep the dry flies in the slick. There's not a lot of natural fish moving, but they're there, they're on top, they're looking for flies, so the dries will work. Preparation is everything. It is so important that you get things right if you want to catch fish. And dry fly is actually particularly more important to get right than anything else. And there's 3 things, apart from actually putting a fly on the end, that I would suggest you do before you actually start fishing. I know it's a temptation, the fish are rising all through this slick, and you just want to get your fly out. But you'll be much more successful by taking just a few moments to do these 3 things. First, dip your fly in kind of waterproofing agent. I use Permafloat. A lot of people use Gink. Gink is a very popular one, but there's lots of them on the market. They're all pretty good. As long as your fly floats, that's what you're trying to achieve. So, and the one advantage with Permafloat is you can just dip the whole fly in, and because it's a liquid, you can pull it straight out again, and it's set up, it's done. That means the dry fly is now waterproof and will sit much better on the surface of the water. You then coat the fly line tip in a coat of grease. Lift into the strike, and the fly line tips are notorious for sinking. With braided butts on, they get waterlogged and pulled under. The fly line tip is the thinnest part and notorious for sinking. In a short film of perma grease or some kind of mucilin, some kind of grease, 2 to 3 feet, keeps your line tips sitting high up on the water, makes it a lot easier for you to lift into the fish. And finally, coating the leader in a sinking compound. Now, to some of you that might sound very odd. Why are you making the most difficult way of not catching a fish, but of getting the fish to look at your flies naturally? Because they float and your leader also floats, and the fish see this profile of leader and flies, and you get countless refusals where the fish come up to your dry, turn away, not having taken it. That is usually for a simple reason that your leader's floating. I tend to leader sink. I put a bit on my finger, I wet my finger, and I apply it from the bob fly, which is the top fly, up about 3 to 4 feet, along the arms of all the droppers, and just give a good coating of sinkant onto your leader and the dropper arms. And then everything is prepared. Those 3 things make a major difference in the success of your dry flies. I'll tell you a little bit about dry fly fishing. There's a lot more theory to dry fly fishing than there is to anything else. Some of it obviously works and some doesn't work. But the first thing is you've got to have 3 flies that float. And modern dry flies float in the surface film rather than on the surface film. And I've got examples of modern dry flies here, and you'll see them sitting on the surface film, sorry, just in the surface film, and it's much more of a natural approach than the old traditional dry flies like coachmans and red tags and flies that actually sit on the surface. And I'll show you those. With the dries, you tend not to work them. Tend not to, not always don't, tend not to. You don't fish a long line because you've got to be able to see your dry flies sitting on the surface. So you fish a short enough line, you keep your eyes on the dry flies, you keep your rod still, you retrieve because of course you're drifting onto the flies, but with general dry fly fishing you only retrieve slow enough to keep in touch with a slack line, not to actually move the dry fly through the surface film. I always actually keep of slack into my yellow fly line because if you've got the slack, the dry flies are going to drift just that little bit more than if your flies are on a really tight line. And if they're on a really tight line, you're going to set up some kind of weird drift that isn't quite as natural as the real flies would. So keep a little bit of slack, keep your eye on the dry flies, and the big tip with dry fly fishing, do not strike. If a fish comes up and head and tails, don't strike like that and lift very sharply out, because all you do is you pull the fly straight out the fish's mouth. You've got to give it time to take the fly. And so what that means is you just lift. The fish comes up and turns on your fly, you see the rise and you just lift into the fish. No snatch, nothing rapid. With all the other types of fishing, you want to strike as fast as you possibly can. As soon as you feel it, or as soon as your line tip twitches or moves, the quicker you strike, the more successful you're going to be. Now the hard part is, you have to have one eye on your 3 flies, and your other eye roaming around looking for these fish that are coming up the slick. And of course they've stopped now, but they'll be back. And again, the fish are moving upwind. There's one coming upwind towards us now. It's a long way off, but I'm going to put it in front of it. And it's on the edge of the slick. And as I say, they swim up these slicks because these calm areas are notorious for holding and trapping the food. And even if the fish, there's not much natural food around as there isn't now, the fish come up these slicks looking for it. So if you see a fish in the slick, count on it going upwind. Cast your flies across the fish, upwind of them, and about 6 to 8 feet short. Now the only other point before we go into the actual flies itself, if you're fishing, where you're trying to cover a kind of, oh, here he comes. You should take this one. If you're fishing blind fishing, I've drowned the fly. That was a bit hasty on the cast. When you don't know where the fish are, try and keep your flies 4 to 5, maybe even 6 feet apart, each dry fly. It covers a lot more water than having your flies too close. But when you're actually casting to fish moving up the slicks, when your flies are 4 or 5 feet apart, the fish can easily go between the flies. And therefore, when I just pulled it out of his mouth. See, problem is talking and fishing at the same time doesn't work. That's the concentration. When you're casting 2 fish, like I'm trying to do now with these fish on the slicks, I'm fishing maybe 2.5 to 3 foot maximum apart between the flies. It gives you a much shorter gap for the fish to miss your fly. I've just pulled one out of the fish's mouth, I can't believe it. There you go. And then last thing is false cast and dry your fly off 3 or 4 times before putting it down. If you've got nowhere in mind, no particular fish in mind to cast to, then cast on the edge of the slick, the calm water and the ripple, and try and get your 3 flies to drop, 1 in the calm water, 1 on the edge, 1 across the ripple, because the fish love to go up the edges. And that's where my fly is sitting at the moment. There you go. Told you the dry would work. Right in the slick. And what an acrobat this fish is. Look, there he is. Look at him go. Oh, that's a beauty. He just worked his way up that slick. I could see him from about 80 yards away. And up he came and just that slow gulf of dry fly. Now my net's tangled. He's going off to the one side. I've got my line under the boat. Everything's happening here. Here we go. Come on. Let's turn him round. Not a big fish, as you can see from the jump, but it's a trouty and it's on the dry. It's worth under on the Booby or anything like that. Middle dropper. There he goes. Oh, oh, oh. Thought he saw something. Saw me or the net. Or the boat. Now he's coming past the boat and he is underneath the boat. And there he goes. Oh, no, he saw me again. They are strong fish here at Chew Valley. They are so strong fighters. Look at the bend in that rod. That's a fast, powerful rod, that one. And look at the bend it's putting in it. Oh, now you've got to drop your rod underwater when you like this, when a fish goes underneath the boat, and try and pull him back in front. Otherwise, you know what happened? One of your flies will hook the keel. There he comes. Come back. Oh. Particularly when you've got a drogue at the back of the boat. Down he's gone again. He knows a few tricks, this fish. We got him. There he is. How about that on the dry fly? I'll put this one back. Wet your hands. Look at that beauty. Middle dropper. Not such a big fish this time. Up, but he was working his way, as the before, up the slicks. He took about 15 feet in front of the boat, so close. I had virtually no fly line out when he took. And it was that slow head and tail. Middle dropper again. Claret the colour. Here he comes. No, he doesn't. There he comes. No, he doesn't. Third time lucky, they say that. There's another fish moving up the slick, so if I can get... Middle dropper again. Claret the colour. Here he comes. No, he doesn't. There he comes. No, he doesn't. Third time lucky, say that. There's another fish moving up slick, so if I can get this chap in, we can whack it out and have a look at that big one. Ah, beauty, my love, my darling trout. If you're going to return fish, wet your hands. Unhook as quick as possible. And send the hook out again in the net, that's great. There she is. About £1.75, £2. And then just slip gently back in the water to swim away, to live to fight another day. Middle dropper. One of the most important things, although the fish are rising all over the place, it's that little preparation thing again. Every time you stop, because you got a fish, because you get a tangle, or just because your flies are sinking, I always squeeze out moisture. You can use tissues, you can use Amadou patches, like a kind of a fungus patch that take out the moisture, and then recoat your fly in floatant, leader and sinker. Just the attention to details. I know it's a minute of your fish time, but it takes a lot longer to catch a fish normally than a minute. And 1 minute of extra preparation can be the difference between one fish and no fish, or 3 fish and no fish, just because you're preparing yourself. It's also started raining, which doesn't matter for the dry fly. It matters for Leo. I'll stick a jacket on a minute. So I just finish off preparing. All flies are coated, sponge dry, re-sinked. Well, that shower of rain. Whilst we're waiting for the fish to come up, let me just show you a couple of the dry flies that I've been using here, and a kind of approach you want to use if you're making your own dry flies. These are mod dries. The main, you don't have to names of the flies. The colours are important. You have a variety of colours and sizes, but the main difference is, for example, this one here has its hackles trimmed underneath. So does the green one. They just sit lower in the surface film. The standard dry flies, the original dry flies with the hackles all around, would sit a little too high on the surface of the water for fish to really look at them. And these ones are the trimmed hackles, and ones indeed like this raider without any hackles at all, just sit in the surface film and just appear to be a bit more natural. So anyway, they're not going to do any good at all sitting in my hand. I'll stick them back in the box and go fishing and see if we can pull out a couple more fish. In these conditions, again, mild, calm, overcast, warm, gentle breeze, fish should be near the surface. So fish floating line. Floating line is great for fishing near the surface, great for general fish because it's easy to cast and easy to detect the take. But sometimes you need to go a little deeper than the standard floating line will let you. And to this extent, you'll find all the top anglers and experienced anglers have a complete range of polyleaders. Polyleaders are just lead sink, basically, made by Efflo and Rio, to my knowledge. Maybe other people make them. And the tip of the line of this, I have clear. You can see the yellow floating line is bright yellow. That's the floating bar. But at the very bottom end of that is a clear, tapered leader. And this is a polyleader. It sinks at about 1.5 inches per second and takes whatever flies you're fishing. In this case, I've got on a mixture of buzzers and nymphs and a fly called a cripplecock, which is just one of the best flies for taking fish that are moving the surface. And this polyleader will sink at about 1.5 inches a second, and is ideal for when you've got conditions like this, when the fish are occasionally rising and you're half-hearted about putting on dries, or you're half-hearted about sticking on wets. You can keep this on, you can fish it quick enough to bring your wets up to the surface. There we go. Or you can just keep on the old poly and just fish blind like that. Whoa, look at that chap. There he goes, he's off to tip up too. Oh my God, that ran out of backing in a moment. Quite a good drag on this reel. He's got some strength, chap. Now come back. We need to see what your fly are on. Open the cripple block. I can't find quick enough. Uh-oh, he's coming lightning fast back. He lost me hat. He has come. What a son. But he's still there. Hey, he's swimming some weed. I've got weed on the end. Look at him go. He knows a few tricks, this one does. I can't keep up with him. I'm going to fall over if I leave back in what was on the top. There he comes. Now we're in more control. Ah, back to how fishing should be nice and sedate and careful. Yeah. In control. Not I wasn't in control earlier on, but in control. And look at that, this line poly, which is a nickname the slime poly is for this intermediate poly, the one that sinks at 1.5 inches per second, has done the business. Come on, my beauty. You must be tired after all those rods. No, he's gone under the boat. I've hooked the net. This is not how to do it. There we go, now we're in control. Ha ha! My booty! That's a bit better. That was a bit better. Right, let's slip him back.
Nice and smooth. Bows on this one, alright,
Yep.
Give me a bit of rabbit. Let's have a jolly good look at it before it goes.
Hooked in the scissors. He's not on the cripcock, he's on the hairs here. Let's just... There, oh look at that nice fat rainbow trout. What a beauty.
Yeah.
What a beauty. Let's zip her back. Gently as she goes. And no problem, more to fight for another day. Wow. Unfortunately, running out of time on this. So many techniques and tactics to show you. But one of the lines which I really enjoy fishing, it's a great fun way and a great successful fish catching way, is traditional loch-style short lining or dibbling. You've got 2 wet flies on, point and little fly, and on the top drop you have a very bushy fly, which we call the bob fly. And the basic idea is you skate top fly through the surface. A couple of pulls, this is too long line, but a couple of pulls, then you skate the top fly over the surface, creating a little wave in the surface film. And the wave draws the fish's attention up. Sometimes they take the bob, sometimes, more often than not, they take the following wet flies. Really, one good rule of thumb with this is the windier it is, the bigger and bushier you want your bob fly. And in calm conditions like this, you only want a subtle hint of wake on the bob fly. I've got a big one on here to try and make it visible for you so you can see the skittering and shaking movement that you're trying to employ on this. But basically, a couple of pulls, lift your tip, and then just skate that fly back over the surface. And when the fish are looking up towards the surface, this will bring the fish up. They'll look at that fly, and you'll often see them follow that fly. And they'll turn away and take the following flies. If they follow the book and if they see the same view as this. You can go to a big bushy muddler if you fish a real rough, heavy wave. And you can fish a very sparse, slim-dressed fly like a bibio in a wave as gentle as this. But as a quick technique, I just wanted to show that. I wanted to give a little idea about this bling. Real short line, doesn't matter how far you can cast, real short line, and give it a go. Ah, that was a great take. I just changed the Polyleader depth with this bright sunlight came out and put on a fast sinking Polyleader. A lot faster sinking than that slime Polyleader fishing earlier on. And first cast, just him sink, it's probably now 3 foot down deep this time. And this beautiful trout has come and taken it. And boy, is this thing giving it a bit of a fight. It's gone around the back of the boat. If I pull the drogue in, get the drogue out of the way, I'm in control, but for how long? Whoa, look at that chap get there. Now, I've got props all over the place here. Let me just manoeuvre myself round. Oh, I'm following. He's going underneath the boat, which is not a good sign. I can work him round to the front. Ah, look at that, like a dog on a lead. It's like walking a salmon, that one. Now we're in control of the chap. My net's hooked up with the drogue. I've ripped the drogue in too quick. Okay, let's have a look at him. He's coming up to the top. This isn't a bad fish. I saw him when he jumped. There he comes up on the top, head and rolling up. 2.5 pounds, which is a lovely, lovely trout. And he's already taken out onto the backing, and he thinks he's going off again for the backing. I know. Come on, my beauty. Taking the point fly in, a hair's ear. The only difference between this fish and other fish is the depth I was fishing the fly with a Polyleader. Just change the Polyleader, it's all the difference. And I've fished many, many days of fishing where has changed 3 or 4 times the depth of Polyleader according to conditions. Come on, my love. One more turn. Oh, these nets are heavy. There. Beauty. Now that is a fish. Oh, look at that chap. That is a splendid quality condition rainbow trout. See you going back in. That's it, the fly is out. Look at that for a beautiful, what a quality, the tail, the fin, that is a quality rainbow trout. Typical chew rainbow. Back she's gonna go. Back she goes. Let her a couple gulps. Into the depth. Well, how about that? I've shown you all the techniques. That's a great way to finish off the techniques. The last fish of the day being a proper chew slab. Excellent. What a fish.
A little more active flies while
Jack, I don't know if you've ever fished the lakes up in BC, but there's some pretty big trout in those lakes. And there are other good lakes in the Northwest. I think of some of the ones in eastern Washington that I've had a chance to fish some of those before. And we actually have some pretty good ones right here pretty close to home in Idaho, as you do in Wyoming. And when I think of fly fishing the lakes with some of these big fish, I think of your good friend Brian Chan.
I first met Brian doing seminars at sport shows in Canada. I was really impressed with how much he knew about lakes. Little did I know that he'd become one of the greatest experts on fishing lakes, especially with Chironomid fishing, which is what leads the way in this Pacific Northwest. You'll really enjoy these tips.
Our setting for this lesson on chironomids couldn't be more spectacular. The Douglas Lake Ranch in south central British Columbia is a massive mixture of rolling hills, forests, mountains, and idyllic lakes. It offers a variety of recreational opportunities, but fishing is the one Skip Morris and Brian Chan have come to partake of. Stony Lake is where we'll be fishing, and it's a perfect place to reside if you happen to be a chironomid. Though they're abundant in most rivers and lakes, the muddy bottoms of still waters are where chironomids thrive. They can hatch throughout the year, but it's in spring and fall when explosions of the pupa can wriggle out of the mud and make their way to the surface. This is when you want to be on the water if you're an angler.
They're just starting to feed today, and hatch is starting to slowly build. And as it builds, there's more and more pupa in the water column. The big fish will come in and eat.
When you say the water column, you're really talking about the water as it stands between the surface and the bottom.
That's right. That entire, and like we were in 30 feet here, so there's a lot of water for the pupa to be
a lot of column. Yeah. Chironomids are funny little guys. They're semi-stout, little worm-looking things, and they're the pupa, and they come up out of the bottom, and then they kind of squirm their way to the surface laboriously, and the fish tend to take them, they can take them at any place, from the surface right down to when they first pop out of the mud, but they usually take them, don't you find, in the bottom 2-3 feet?
Usually they'll take the pupa within a couple feet or 3 feet of the bottom of the lake.
Right.
And then they'll follow them quite a ways higher into the water column and then take them, 10 feet below the surface of the lake.
Now, in the lakes that I fish near my home in Washington, the fish tend to take chironomids a lot as adults or just under the surface. So you kind of have to keep an open mind about how you fish this hatch.
I've let my type 3 sinking line sink till it's perfectly vertical, straight up and down, and then I'm doing a real slow but steady figure of 8 or hand twist retrieve. Bring her straight up. There it is.
Oh! Okay, type 4 line. I'm going to my type 4 line now. I'm just going to keep switching gear all day long until I get a fish.
Man, did you see that rod go?
Oh, man!
And I thought I hit a snag. I said, what? There's no snags down there at 30 feet. He just stopped it.
Wow. So you're still fishing the bomber, huh?
Oh, yeah. No, first fish of the morning, Skip.
Okay, you convinced me.
I'm just going to do a throat pump on this fish.
Okay.
Figure out what they're eating.
Pumping a fish's stomach is not something you want to do unless you've been taught how. As a fisheries biologist, Brian's technique won't harm this beautiful Kamloops trout.
Good looking Kamloops.
And then I'm just going to put them into the vial, and there you go. He's eating chironomid pupa, and they're all alive.
Chironomid pupa.
Chironomid pupa. And it's just the start of the day, Skip, so hopefully this is a sign of good things to come.
Yes, amen. Well, I was fishing a leech, and I was having a lot of fun fishing it, but no fun catching fish, and I'd rather catch fish, so I'm going to switch to a, what are they, about a size 12?
Yeah, 12.
There's a little black chironomid, about a size 12, chironomid pupa with a little bead in its head. I'm going to get that little bugger right down close to the bottom and retrieve it very slowly.
So what we've done this morning is we're anchored in about 29 feet of water. And we chose that deep water because there's chironomid pupa coming up. We can see them coming up through the water column. So chances are the fish are eating the pupa fairly close to the bottom. So I've put on a type 3 density compensated sinking line, and we're casting it out about the depth we're anchored in, and then letting it sink till the fly line is straight up and down or vertical, and then doing a really slow hand twist retrieve right up to the surface. And that's imitating the natural rise of the pupa through the water column.
Having the right method at the right time is critical. That's why Skip scurries to match Brian's presentation. There are different ways to accomplish the same task, and this pair have spent countless hours figuring out which one is best at any given time. In fact, Skip and Brian collaborated on a book, Morris and Chan on Fly Fishing Trout Lakes, detailing how to fish a variety of insect forms on most still waters.
We found a bunch of fish moving, and they're probably feeding on chironomid pupa real close to the surface, or they're even taking the adults. So we're just going to sneak in there and cast a few flies in there and see if we can get them to bite. It's
Every so often it happens. Things are just right, and all the fish you ever dreamed of are there. In this case, the wind has pushed the hatching pupa to the end of the lake. There's a cool spring offering ideal water temperature, and a swarm of Kamloops trout are waiting to be discovered by Skip and Brian.
Yeah, what are we doing here, Brian? We were fishing in 25, 30 feet of water a while ago.
yeah, well, we found a shallow water chironomid hatch.
And a bunch of fish.
And a bunch of fish feeding.
Well, that's good enough for me.
Does that work?
Oh yeah, I'm perfectly happy with a bunch of fish. No problemo.
Put an indicator on you. Hard to...
Oh, well, good thing I just took mine home. Oh!
They're just plucking at it.
That's not right.
Someone will eat it.
Maybe they need a furry dragon. Maybe that's what they're begging for. Oh, there you go.
Oh yeah. Oh. Ooh.
Ooh, that's a good fish.
Ooh. It's a bit of a challenge landing them in here.
Oh, oh, oh. Cripes.
Gotta kind of put the brakes on. Oh.
Oh, gee.
Get out of there.
Oh, my turn. Oh, this is going to be a trick. Net. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I netted him. That's right. Oh, yeah.
In such a situation where food and frantic fish activity collide, we could slide our underwater camera into position and get some great shots. The first thing to look at is the pattern we're fishing, a Chironomid pupa. It doesn't look like much underwater, but apparently looks enough like the real thing to interest the trout. If you watch carefully, we have an actual take on the fly underwater. A number of fish pass it by with little interest, but out of nowhere, one spies the Chironomid and takes it with abandon.
There he is.
There you go.
There's a nice one. Nice doe.
Gee,
That's a nice fish.
that is.
Beautiful. Whoa. No, I'll just let her go. There's a beautiful. That's like close to 20 inches.
Oh boy! No. No.
Buck, Skip.
Oh!
Yeah. Horse him.
I'm doing all I can on a 4-weight. So far he's playing along pretty well. Early netting. Oh,
Head first.
I'm trying. There. Thank you, Brian.
All of our attempts to get Skip and Brian focused back on instruction were destroyed by the incredible fish action that we encountered. There's a lesson here, but it escaped all of us at this point.
Spring area.
Uh-huh. Oh, is this a spring?
Yeah, and there's that. And these fish are kind of concentrated in here, and they're feeding
Kinda.
on Chironomid.
Well, this is a nice sized fish.
Our summary for Chironomid angling was lost somewhere in the heat of battle. It may still dwell somewhere in this bay of Stony Lake on the Douglas Lake Ranch, but we can't find it. For all the details on how Morris and Chan fish lakes, you might want to look for their book at your favorite fly shop.
Last year, we had the pleasure of doing seminars with Denny Rickards, a fellow Oregonian, and man, does he know about lakes. He's written some fabulous books and videos on lake fishing, and I know, Mike, you really love lake fishing.
Well, I do enjoy it, and when I'm at the sports show, not doing programs of my own, he's one of the guys I like to go and watch the seminars. And I think he knows about as much about lake fishing as he's probably forgotten more than I'll ever learn.
Yep.
And with most fishing, it all starts at home, preparation, planning. And I think he's got some great tips on kind of what we need to know when we're getting ready to go and what we need to take with us.
Denny has some great ideas on some of the rules, some of the things to remember when you go out to fish lakes. So take it away, Denny.
You know, one of the reasons I fish lakes because it offers us an opportunity to catch a lot of big fish, probably a lot more than what you're going to do on a stream and a river. And the other thing that I really like about fishing lakes is it gives you a lot of solitude, but You know, we struggle a lot of times because lakes seem to be intimidating for a lot of us, but folks, it doesn't have to be. Fishing lakes is really a matter of three things. Presentation, which really includes your ability to cast, get the fly to the fish, the fly line that you choose to fish with, which controls the depths and the angles, and the retrieve. So if you can concentrate on those points along with the patterns that you use, make sure that they're suggestive, they imitate more than one food source, and look at the conditions that you face when you're out on the water, because those conditions will change and vary. So these are the reasons that I'm successful on lakes. You know, folks, one of the things that I find that's really critical, and I try to share this with all the clients when I'm guiding, is that when you get out to the lake, before you even get started, there's 5 key things that you have to look at, because these 5 keys are going to give these trout direction as to where they're going to be, what depth they'll be at, what they're going to feed, how fast they'll digest their food, when they spawn. And here's the 5 that I look at. First thing I'm going to look at is the sky. Is it sunny or cloudy? Because that'll make a lot of difference on what fly we're going to use, what depth we're going to fish. Second point that's critical to me is the water. Is it flat like you see here right now, or is it rippled? Third thing, is the water warm or is it cold? Because if the water's cold, that means we're going to have to slow down our retrieves. If it's warmer, we can do a lot of other things that are different. We can speed up our retrieve. Fourth thing, I look at the water and determine whether it's clear or it's cloudy, because if it's cloudy, we can do some things that we can't do when the water's clear. That's a tougher presentation thing. And the fifth thing, one that you have to know, you got to know the depth of the water you're fishing, folks. If you don't have some way of measuring it with a depth finder or something, then you can probe and count down on your line until you start hitting that bottom. But these are the key things, and all these things will direct and tell these fish where they're going to be, what they're going to eat, how soon they're going to digest, is points I just made a minute ago. And from those points, all that tells us, it'll tell us what line to use, what retrieve to use, what flies, what speed to pull them. And it's really kind of a key to what you need to do in order to be successful. Lines for fishing lakes, one that I use 70% of the time is Cortland's Camo line. That's an intermediate line, and the reason it's so important, they're the only company so far who have been able to design a line that will sink from maybe 1 inch to 1.25 inches per second. You need a line that's going to sink slowly and hold you in the zone, and that's what that Camo line does. The other line that I use a lot is the Cortland 444 SL, and that's a line that's twice as fast, almost 2 inches per second. And you need to fish that line in depths of 6 to 12 feet. And you can go with faster sinking stuff, but the key is to get it in the zone and keep it there. And those faster sinking lines sometimes will travel down below it too quick. The Camo, with a slow sink rate, you don't want to sit here and count all day waiting for your fly to get down there. So basically, those are the 2 lines that I use. You can always use floaters, but I find that you have less options with a floating line as opposed to the line that sinks because of what we imitate. So that's basically what I use on lakes. And of course, there's a ghost tip line out there also made by Cortland that is fast becoming one of my favorites because it allows you to match the emerging insects that come up through the water probably better than the other line on the market. So the Camo and a Type 2 are my first choices. The clear floater and the Camo would be, or the ghost tip would be my other 2 that I would use on lakes for the most part. I think it's the biggest difference right now is it's going to allow us to make our presentations a little smoother on the water. If you find a flat condition like this right now, you're going to spook a lot of fish if you're false casting the colored line. The clear lines won't reflect any sun and allows you to get your fly out there without moving those fish. So that, plus the fact that they ride a little higher, I think will make a big difference for those of us who want to fish either dry on lakes or even on the emergence. The main thing is to get your fly in front of that fish without spooking him, and that's what that line's going to allow us to do. The water gets real flat like this. That tends to put fish down a little bit deeper, so I just switched to a seal bugger, and I'm going to probe down on these deeper depths now and see if we can't get something that, because they'll tend to lay a little deeper when that bright sun with the flat water comes out. So I'm going to use this kind of pull just like this, see if we can get them to react to this, and there he is right there. So all you have to do is just start probing. If what you're using isn't working, you have to face these hot conditions like this. Sometimes it's easier to go down, and that's what I mean by not being afraid to experiment and try different flies. And the bugger is such a suggestive fly for me that you just have to try this different stuff. This water's a little darker, so I dropped that fly down a little bit deeper while we were talking, just to see if that would make a difference, and they are. They're laying a little bit deeper. This is a nice cutthroat again, about 16, 17 inches. They're a little more lethargic. You see, he's not overly excited about cold water, and showing him that net. It's a nice cutthroat though. Took that bugger really well. There's a nice cutthroat. That's a Yellowstone cutthroat. I'll put him right in there and let him. Now he's ready to go. For still waters, in fact, that thing's effective fly for just about anything. Steelhead guys do well with that particular fly. I went down deeper, and that's why I put on the blacker pattern so it'd show up a little bit better. Want to learn more about stillwater fly fishing? My first book, Fly Fishing Still Waters, is really a how-to and covered 30 years of fishing lakes, and I think that would be a tremendous aid for you. If you're interested more on where the better lakes and the bigger fish are, the second book, which is Fly Fishing the West Trophy Lakes, will cover those points and how to fish each one of those lakes. And the last book that we just came out with is on stillwater patterns, not just the ones that I fish, but some of the best dries, nymphs, streamers. There's 15 of the best experts in the country, people that I'm confident in, and I respect their ability out on lakes, and they have their patterns, and all this is contained in there, not only how to fish them, but how to tie them. And so if you guys are interested in any of that, or even the videos where we show you the patterns and the techniques that we've talked about, you can contact me at area code 541-381-2218, or you can write us. We're at P.O. Box 470, Fort Klamath, Oregon, 97626. We'll be glad to send you a catalog. Contains all the products that I use on the water, and I think you'll find that everything in there will help you to be a better stillwater fly fisherman.